Margaret, thanks so much for being here. Do you want to talk to us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, welcome everybody. It's really lovely to see you. I I'm a doctor in public health. Worked in that field for over 30 years. Very recently retired from a job in the National Health Service in order to work with the International Futures Forum, and I'm a director of health programs there. This is a small charity that reaches out across the world to foster ways of thriving, not just surviving in the 21st century. So its main mission is educational rather than health, but I kind of use some of the tools and resources to enable people to live healthier lives. And over the summer, because of the pandemic, I was asked to go back into my former organization, which was NHS Fife, just on a part-time basis. But I worked there over the summer in order to sort of support and develop the test and protect system for our local population in Fife. Fife is a county of 370,000 people, so it's quite a small area, but it's geographically, you know, over 55 miles east-west and about 35 miles north-south. So it's quite spread out in terms of a population. The biggest town has 40,000 people, so it's mostly scattered villages and towns. Very beautiful part of the world. If ever you come to Scotland, we're just north of Edinburgh, and it's got a beautiful coastline as well as a few hills, but nothing big. You can climb them in an afternoon. Yeah, so that's a bit about me. And I'm happy to take questions really, because we're in very unprecedented times. He asked me, what is COVID? So, I mean, I'm sure you all know what COVID is.
I mean, I don't really know what it is, other than it's very infectious and very deadly for people who are older. But
Yeah.
beyond that, not really. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a coronavirus is a family of viruses. They're called coronas because they on the surface of them, if you look in a microscope, it can look like a crown in cross section. It can look like a crown, and one of the coronavirus causes the common cold. Of course, there are many slight variants of that common cold virus, which is why you come around and you get one, you know, every season you'll often get maybe one, possibly two common cold type virus infections. And they do nothing more than infect the upper respiratory tract, and they're harmless basically. I mean, they can trouble you for a few days, but you get over them. Now, this coronavirus is a more serious infection, and it's described within that family of ones that cause acute respiratory syndrome. So, if you remember the SARS outbreak
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
decade, that was the severe.
Mhm.
SARS stands for severe acute respiratory syndrome, and there's been another variant of coronavirus that's called a Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, because it was primarily in the Middle East where it was coming up. It was coming up in Saudi Arabia around the Hajj and things like that.
Yeah.
And but it presents with a very similar set of symptoms. It presents with this severe breathing difficulty. Um, and that's why it got called. The actual name of the virus is SARS-CoV-2. In other words, it's a severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus type 2, as opposed to the first one which we had, which was back in which you'll be familiar with from the outbreak in the Far East, in Asia. It was in the early noughties. And what that did, as you probably know, was create a lot of infection in healthcare workers. So there was a lot of concern about that, and the need therefore, the need therefore to prepare for that kind of eventuality across the healthcare systems of the world, really. So there's a lot more attention given to protective equipment, personal protective equipment on that basis. But coronavirus 2 or SARS-CoV-2 causes this infectious disease, COVID ID. The ID part of that is infectious disease. 19 because it was in 2019 when it was first described. And that is the kind of clinical condition that we have when we have coronavirus. As I say, it's largely presents with this cough, fever, shortness of breath, and feeling unwell. Maybe you lose a sense of smell or taste. That's quite an unusual symptom. So it seems to be quite specific to this virus. So that's been one of the useful things from point of view of trying to ascertain whether it's coronavirus or it's a flu. Now, my work in public health has been around preparing for infections of this type, but also pandemics of flu. Primarily in our planning processes, we were anticipating pandemics coming through. I was involved in the H1N1 pandemic, and we have plans in place for that eventuality. And when this new coronavirus emerged, what we all did was dust down our flu plans, our pandemic flu plans, and put them into action. Now, the difficulty was, particularly in the West, I don't think we'd genuinely learnt about SARS. And we'd anticipated that we would be able to manage this pandemic with basically some control of spread to prevent overwhelm of our healthcare system, but eventually people will become immune to it. This notion of herd immunity. And okay, yes, there'll be a vaccine around the corner, but there was that balance between population immunity to this infection and dealing with it presenting to the hospitals. The trouble is that this new virus, SARS-CoV-2, this new infection, COVID-19, is not flu. It's not flu. And it has led us to change and amend our approaches actually very rapidly. Over the course of from January to March, there was a real need to adapt and adjust to what we were dealing with, the reality. They say the best laid plans are only really, they tend to get discarded the moment they come into contact with reality.
Yeah.
And this was an example of that. The reason, well, there's lots of complicated reasons why this is the case. Am I going on too long in this? Everybody's
No.
nodding. So, do you want me to carry on, or do you want more questions?
Yeah,
No,
it's okay. You can.
I think it's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I say, the reason for this readjustment was because the severity of the illness. It's a very much more serious illness, not just in the elderly. I mean, it does hit everybody pretty badly. I mean, not everybody, because some people are very symptomatic, etc. But the vast majority of people who get it do get ill with it. It's about 80%, and the symptoms will lay you low for a good week, if not longer, if you are healthy and fit and well. I mean, it's quite and you can still get further complications, and you could still get quite severely ill. And it seems as if it's not such a single organ infection. It's not just your respiratory system that can get affected. It seems as if there's this immune response to the infection, which in itself generates other problems, heart problems, circulatory problems, maybe even into the brain. It's mainly a vascular problem, and the other aspect of the breathlessness is that it only comes on very late, relatively speaking, to the level of low oxygen you have in your blood. So what that means is that when you get to hospital, they can't understand you've got such low oxygen levels. And it's again a complex reason for that around the way it's affected the lung. That means that you're not getting the same triggers to the brain that you're short of oxygen that you would normally get. Normally you get it because normally you get a sense of getting breathless because you've got a buildup of carbon dioxide in your bloodstream. But that doesn't happen in COVID. And so it is literally when your oxygen goes right down that you start getting breathless. And that means that people, when they start getting breathless, is much more ill than we're not used to, if you like. So that can happen in fit, healthy people. Obviously, if you've got any underlying condition or any other predisposing risk factors, namely age, which is the biggest risk factor, then that's going to make it a whole lot more problematic for you. And that's what we're seeing. We see a dramatic rise in the death rate from COVID-19 in those over the age of 65. And there's a huge steep climb in terms of the risks as you get older. Every decade after that, the risks get higher and higher. Yeah, so those are a few kind of features of COVID-19 that made it different from flu. And we had to recalibrate all of our planning and thinking about it. Another aspect, so that's about the seriousness of the illness. The other aspect of it is the way it spreads. So it actually does spread more quickly, quite invisibly, because there's these 2 days before you actually develop symptoms that you're infectious, and it has this kind of ability to spread to a large number of people from a single source. So that's a super spreader type of event, or a super spreader person who, without any fault of their own, lead to an awful lot of cases. So even if you do some general kind of contact tracing, et cetera, if you miss that one person or that one specific event, you've got yourself a lot more cases again. And that's a different pattern from flu. And it's what's proving problematic in terms of control. So, sorry, one more point. Vaccines. Vaccines against COVID, that too is going to be problematic because we've never had a vaccine against a coronavirus before. And the jury's still out because of its immune response is different from flu. The jury's still out on whether or not we'll have one that will work.